everybody. So, what better way to spend a day than to get together with a bunch of fellow oil and gas explorers and just talk about ideas and how we find oil and gas and share concepts with each other. And I think we need to start off, and a big thank you to Dan Billman and Mike Koenigk for organizing our day today. Thanks, guys, for putting together a great list of speakers, and I think it'll be a meaningful day for us. So, when I first got in the business of organizing programs for APG, I like to hear about discoveries, and I have a feeling a lot of other people feel the same way. And I looked around and I attended a lot of the APG programs, and there's some incredible technical material at APG meetings, as we all know. But I didn't see talks where people explained their thinking process, the professional aspects of how maybe they were putting the project together and the challenges they had to overcome. And so I thought, okay, so when you want to hear something and it doesn't exist, there's only one thing to do, and it's to start calling up your friends and saying, hey, let's get together and let's tell some stories. So as the years have gone by, I called up all my friends pretty quickly in the first couple of years. I had to make a lot of new friends, and so it's really exciting because as we started Discovery Thinking program, and Ted Beaumont, who'll be speaking here shortly, was with me in San Antonio in 2008, we just asked some of the best explorers we could find to tell us some of their stories. And so the programs I'm going to speak to you today are the Discovery Thinking and the Playmaker, like the one we're here today. And what I think is really exciting for everybody is if the Beatles had recording sessions, but nobody, or if the Beatles got together and played music, but nobody ever recorded it, we wouldn't have the legacy that we do. So from day one in San Antonio in 2008, when we got some of these great explorers together, we turned on the cameras, and with their permission, we have on AAPG's webpage, we have their wisdom. So you can hear their talks about the different discoveries. And we have about 100 now of people talking about interesting plays. And so this talk today, the one that I'm doing right now, will be posted on AAPG. And I'll show you, that's part of the plan for this talk, is I'll show you how to access this information, because my concept is if you're a geologist and you're at lunchtime and you would like to hear about what a great explorer has to say about exploration or on a particular field discovery or a particular play discovery, you can just, at your desktop, click it and have a half an hour or 40-minute dialogue, interrogate the presentation on your laptop. So, and I think what's really exciting is APG and DPA are really the only guys that are doing this. So, as Mike talked about DPA, I think that it's really exciting that this group is taking a leadership position in getting good professional talks out there and available. So, I like to think of resources. We all need resources to do our job. So what I would like to draw from today are the Discovery Thinking forums that have been recorded, the Playmaker forums. So just a quick question, how many people have been to a Discovery Thinking forum at an AAPG or an ICE? Okay, that's pretty good. We do them every year. We're planning one for Calgary in June, if you're going to that. And we've had a really great response to that. A lot of times we have 500, 800 people standing room only because we try to get some of the really exciting topics. And Bill Zagorski, not sure if Bill's here yet, Bill's presented several times. Okay, so now this is a trick question. How many people have been to a Playmaker? And all of us in this room are at a Playmaker today. And so in the past, those speakers who have been willing to post their slides have done so. And so I hope many of the speakers today, I believe we've got a good number of people who are going to be able to post their slides from today. And then there are some programs that I was involved with about 20 years ago for the Houston Geological Society, and we have the Legends programs where we have some great, those are also accessible on the web. And so what I like to think, in the old days, exploration wisdom was kind of tightly held. And I think of the analogy, it's kind of like, okay, so the biblical analogy is that Bible books were written in Latin, and a few priests understood and were able to translate. And then it was translated into English, and the Gutenberg Bible came along, and then all of a sudden everyone could understand. So for me, being able to post these talks and the presentations on the web has had a major impact. So it's not the 7 sisters anymore, but it's like the 700,000 sisters. So these are resources that are available to everybody. And I like the fact that when you're watching a presentation, you can pause and absorb and go back. And I think it's not just a different way to experience a presentation and material, but it's a better way. So I just want to take a few minutes to talk about the collection, the who, what, when, where, and why. So I love the phrase, the hero with 1,000 faces. And our exploration story is basically a heroic journey. And here are some of the faces of individuals who have spoken at these programs. And we have 85 speakers, and about 70 of them have posted. And we're working towards 100 because the early impetus for doing this collection was to celebrate AAPG's 100th anniversary, which is coming up next year. When we started doing this, it was about 10 years off. So, and then we got together and we looked at the people who have made these presentations in the collections that I want to share with you today. And 9 of them are the Norm Foster Outstanding Explorers of the Year. And if you go to an APG meeting and the Norm Foster recipient, Outstanding Explorer, comes up and gets his award and then sits down. And as I said in the audience, I thought, yeah, but I want to know why this person is coming up and getting this award. Tell me the story. So we went and asked them to come and tell us the story. How did you make this discovery? How did you make this giant field? And so they did. So we have a lot of Norm Foster explorers. Many of the fields that are talked about in this collection are giant fields, and we have a fair number of Hal Booty medalists and Sidney Powers medalists. Now, the collection that I'll share with you, and by the way, there are cards I put early this morning. There are little business cards with the web links, how to find this stuff, because people always ask, hey, this is really exciting. I want to get to the collection, but I couldn't write down the address. So on those cards, if you store those, you'll be able to access this collection. And so the collection resides in cyberspace right now, but the talks were given in real spaces all around the world, starting in San Antonio. And in 2012, we started doing them at the AAPG International programs because the concepts are really basic, but discoveries are global, and we want to learn about other places for analog purposes. And as I mentioned, we're having another Discovery Thinking program in Calgary in June, and also one in Cancun this September. And I love the graphic on the bottom of the historic APG founders, and then as you notice, as you go to the right along the timeline, the individuals are getting much more colorful and diverse. And here's the where. So these are the past ones that we've done, and amazingly, about 40% of the attendance at these previous meetings, people have come from out of town. So there's a lot of local participation, as there is today, but we also, here today, there are a lot of people from the Pittsburgh area, but there's probably 30 or 40% of people who have traveled to be here because everyone wants to hear about some of these great discoveries. And so, as Mike mentioned, we're moving to Bakersfield, and we're hoping in the future to do several more of these. And I think the Mid-Continent is a very good spot for some future. So, and then I think, okay, so here's the why. And you can never go wrong with the Marlon Downey quote. And Marlon has a saying that the study of history is a shortcut to wisdom. And as we were hearing last night, I was sitting with Bill Zagorski, we were listening to Larry Garmazy at the PLAYPG meeting, and Larry was explaining the process by which SHALE did a lot of its play analysis. And Bill turned to me, and we looked at each other, and we realized that in this competitive world, you have to be fast. So a lot of times you don't have the luxury of doing all of this detailed analysis. So I think that wisdom, in a world where it's highly competitive and we all have to be on our games, the best way to develop exploration skills is to go quickly to the places and the people who have done it before. They're exploration analogs. So on HBO and Netflix, you can do this thing called binge watching. I don't know how many of you are guilty of binge watching a particular series. You know, you're watching a show and it's so good, and then you just want to see what happens to the next episode and so on. So okay, I have a confession to make. I binged watched the Discovery Thinking collection, and the Playmakers. It took me about a week, but I went through all of the talks, and I got to warn you, it's really powerful stuff. I mean, it's like drinking 10 cups of coffee, because you get so excited by hearing the success of other people that it's like, wow, I can do that. Here are a few things I can use. So I did that, and then I wrote down a couple of the lessons, because I have to say, if you go into the collection of these approximately 100 presentations, there are so many exploration lessons about how discoveries were made. So these are just a very short offering of a couple of what I thought were the top ones. And DPA, as Mike mentioned, one of the things about DPA is business. So there's been a lot of emphasis in AAPG about science. But let's face it, folks, we're not the GSA. We're here because our stakeholders want to make money, and they're counting on us to help find the energy and to deliver the promises we make to our investors. So a powerful theme in all of these talks is success is not just technical success. It's all of the factors that make it a business success. And the business environment has a huge impact. And so a lot of the presenters talk about that. There are several of the major discoveries that are in this collection. People just did basic fundamental geology. They looked, they saw a lot of sand on the shelf. They wondered, there's a notch or something and a channel system feeder, and they wondered, could there be sand down dip? Or they were down dip in sand producing areas, and they were wondering, could there be reduction up on the slope in the mid dip? So a lot of that basic kind of depositional system thinking. Technology, we've got some great examples in the collection of how people have gone back to old areas again and again and found new things by using new data sets. The Earth didn't change, but the concepts and the technology changed. So there's a whole series of talks about how that happens. We all know the power of integration. When I was at SHALE in the 1980s, there was this thing called white space. So there was an engineering department, there was an exploration department, and there was, on the org chart, there was white space between them. And what we've learned recently, and a lot of the people that are presenting in these discovery talks talk about, is how engineering, geophysics, and geology, some combination or a combination of all of them, created opportunities that hadn't been created before. So we have a lot of great examples of that. And of course, always if you go to new places, there's a good chance of finding new things. So we have a series of giant discoveries of people who have stepped out into the deep water or come up with new play concepts. And one thing I learned as I did the watching of the different talks is that most of the successful people had some kind of workflow. And of course, there's no universal workflow for exploration, but people who are successful had things that they tended to do, and there's conventional and there's unconventional, and there's different workflows. And so we have some talks about, for example, Dan Tierpak, many of you may know Dan, he had the 10 Habits of Highly Successful Oil Finders. This talk is available in our collection, and Dan talked about the geometries that you need to make sure your maps are correct in 3D space. And this is very powerful in the Gulf Coast if you're trying to get your fault throws right and make your maps work. We also have talks by Dick Stoneburner, who was giving the distinguished AAPG lecture on the new workflows in unconventional plays, the importance of pore throat to basin analysis. And of course, Bill Zagorski's stuff, Bill's talks talk about the same kind of thing, the importance of using the core work. So there's a whole lot of information on workflows that's very helpful. And then a lot of the speakers, as they described their successes, talked about the importance of really believing and being able to communicate. So that's sort of the game plan of what is the content in these presentations. So I thought we would just go through them, a couple of them. I'm just highlighting. Remember, there's 100 talks here, but this is kind of what the messages are. So back to Marlon, and let's see if we can invoke Marlon here by the power. If I'm talking about videos, I guess I better show one, huh? Oops. See if I can get this to go. So here's some comments by Marlon Downey at one of the Legends programs. Oops. Trying to get it.
What then I would say is that my own philosophy is, folks, it's easy finding oil and gas, but it's hell to make money finding oil and gas. And the mantra that I commonly use is simply that geology is a science, geophysics is a science, but exploration is a business.
So I just want to show quickly a few highlights here. Here's John Amoruso talking at New Orleans about his discovery. He was working the shelf in East Texas. He noticed a well with a particularly thick channel sand at the edge of the shelf, and he noticed that down dip, these dots are well controlled, that there was a huge area in yellow that had very few wells. And subsequently, his partners discovered a major field down dip because of the Chan feeder turbidite system. And so if you want to hear, I'm just giving you 15 seconds of the concept, but John has an entire talk on how that field was discovered, and it's located on the collection in the Discovery Thinking. Jim Bob Moffett gave a talk, one of the great explorers in the Gulf of Mexico. There was a lot of Wilcox production down dip. There was Wilcox production up dip, and there was a big question, well, could there be Wilcox fields in the middle? And so his team went about making a whole series of very nice discoveries. This is Dan Smith, past president of AAPG. I love this talk. Dan has a talk about salt domes, and this one is near New Orleans. It's called Stella Salt Dome. Here's where the discovery well was made in 1940 from I believe it was just a subsurface map. And then here is a subsequent map in 1965. There was one seismic line, I believe. So it's basically a map using wells and minimal seismic. Here was a map made in 1975, a little more seismic. And then, of course, it progresses through time. The first 3D was, I think, in the late 80s and 90s. And then there was a second 3D. And notice how the complexity of the map and the concepts have changed. And the dome hasn't changed. But Dan is very happy to have gone back to this dome again and again, because with new technology, he's been able to find a lot of reserves. One of the outstanding explorers of the year, Hans Ronevik, talked about giant discoveries in the North Sea. The North Sea, prior to the Utsira High discoveries, Hans called it the Dead Sea. And in the Gulf of Mexico, we've called the Gulf of Mexico the Dead Sea at various times as well. Just a period of no discovery, and then all of a sudden, through high quality imaging, there was an Exxon well drilled on a bald basement high, and of course Lundin, and Hans tells the story, was able to see sedimentary packages coming off the basement high. It turned out they had Darcy quality rock, and 2.5 billion barrels later, it's a huge success. And I'll just make a point. It's interesting that this was around basement highs. I've noticed in the collection a lot of interesting discoveries around basement highs. So the thought has occurred to me that would be a really interesting model to start a company, just going back to old basement highs. We have Mike Forrest talking about the development of the concept of bright spots and how it happened, and he was there, and it's been a transformative technology for seismic attributes, but this was back in 1967, and so we have Mike explaining how that all occurred. Here's a great example by Ed Locricchio on integration in the Anadarko Basin. The vertical wells are shown in blue and black, and there was a huge proliferation of horizontal drilling. So this is a case where engineering made a play that couldn't otherwise exist. And one of the keys was to getting the 11 different levels that you had to have good fundamental geologic correlations so that you could horizontally drill your stacked horizons. This came to us from Rick Fritz. It's an Anadarko Petroleum Distinguished SPE lecture on how do you evaluate shale plays and some of the ways that you need to quickly assess the viability. We've had people tell us that they get together with their geologist, geophysicist, engineer at luncheons and watch some of these talks. And this is one of the talks we've heard a lot of people like to refer to as a team building exercise. We've had talks about the conjugate margin plays, which are on both sides of the Atlantic. A lot of excitement and giant discoveries being made there. We've had thrust belt discoveries, and Ted, I know you remember Doug Strickland, as I do. Doug was a great explorer, and Doug talked to us about how do you go into a fold and thrust belt play and find a significant new discovery where everyone says that there's no chance, that it's an area that basically has been overlooked. And we've had guys like Tony Hayward, who actually has a life after BP. He had a company called Janelle, and he's talked to us about their discoveries in thrust belts in Iraq. And so if you go, and I'll be getting here quickly to the link, but I just wanted to point out, this is, if you go to the Playmaker link, you get all of these tabs. And so you can pick, here's Dan Tierpach's 10 Habits Highly Successful Oil Finders, here's Dick Stoneburner. Two other very interesting talks on here. All of these are good talks. Bill Zagorski talks about the Marcellus Shale, and Steve Brockman, how to market your prospect at NAPE, which if you go to NAPE, that's a really useful presentation. So here's Bill Zagorski. He's presented at 2 Discovery Thinking forums. What's amazing about his talks that he has been able to share with us is just the level of information, all the way from the pore throat to the basin scale. Here's Steve Brockman. He has a talk on how to sell your prospect. And what I really like, Steve has this concept that when you're showing a prospect, you should have a talking map that you can put on the table so that all of your displays and all your points, you can keep bringing people back to a common map where the prospect is, where the well control is, where the seismic data is. And I use this myself in the work that I do with prospects. And Steve has some other very good tips. He says you should have a 30-second prospect presentation, a 5-minute prospect presentation, and a full-blown prospect presentation, and should know when to use each of them. Sometimes people only want the 30-second version. And so he's got some very good tips. So we've had Bill Barrett talk about big discoveries in the Rockies. And so let me get to how do you get to these collections? So if you go to the APG webpage and you go under publication on the tab, there's a search and discovery, and you click on that. That's one click. There's a special collection tab, and the APG DPA Playmaker forums are right here. And then you can see all of the previous ones that are available. Some of them are just PowerPoint slides. Some of them have audio, so you can hear the presenters, and some of them have both audio and video. And then the Discovery Thinking forums that I talked about, there's the collection there. And basically, these are the keys to the kingdom. APG webpage, publications, search and discovery, special collections. And on the cards that are at the table, we've got how to do it. So here's the link. And there's some valuable information on the web also, on the DPA webpage. So I used to love this U.S. News and World Report. They had a program called News You Can Use. So out of the approximately 100 talks that we have, 50 Discovery Thinking and 50 Playmaker, I estimated that people in Playmaker forums, we've had about 1,000 people. In the eighth, this is the eighth one, this is the seventh Playmaker. And in Discovery Thinking, we've had probably about 5,000 to 7,000 people show up in auditoriums. But we've got close now to about 50,000 hits on the web. So there's a real ability for people who have heard the talk to go back and to learn from the talk and to share the talk. So I think that the web is something that's really important in helping AAPG get the mission out on science and professionalism. And these are the two publications that you can download from the DPA website. The one on the right is one I know a little bit about. There are some great stories about oil and gas finders, their advice, their proudest moments, the things that they wish they could do over, lessons. Back to Marlon's quote, lessons, if you want a shortcut to wisdom is watching and listening to some of the great explorers who've come before us. So with that, I want to point out, I got the slide. So DPA has about 3,000 members. We couldn't fit them all on the slide, but we tried. And we wanted to, as a plug for DPA, we wanted to say that if you're not already a DPA member, please consider joining us because you belong in the center of the action. And I've had the great privilege to work with these absolutely wonderful people, many of whom are in this room. And I have to say a big thank you. As I mentioned, I started out with a few friends, and I've made a few more friends over the years, and all of these wonderful people have contributed. But most importantly, I want to thank all of the presenters, those of you who are going to be speaking later today, for sharing with us your stories. And whether or not we can post it or not, we sure do appreciate that. And so I think we need to thank all of the explorers who've shared their stories with us. So let's give them a round of applause, please.